Happy 2025, everyone. Welcome to Rubrik and AWS, Stronger Together for Cyber Resilience. Today's webinar is sponsored by Rubrik and AWS and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Keith Ward, and this, folks, is my first live event of the new year. It is great to see everyone here, and that includes Richard from Texas, Tom from California. Tom, I hope you are okay out there. John from Torrance, also in California. Hope all our California attendees are well. Melanie and Gilbert and Ed and Vrej and Robert, Paul, Martin, the whole gang is here today. Please keep telling us where you are coming from. Tom, great to hear that you are safe. Morteza, another from California. I hope you are safe. So good to see everyone for this first event for me in the new year. Now, before we get to the main event, though, I do need to cover some housekeeping items. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so please fire away with any and all questions that you have. Just drop them there in the questions box in your webinar control panel. That is the same place where you have been telling us where you're coming from and just saying hi. Now, we are also going to have the Rubrik team lurking behind the scenes today to answer your questions during the entire presentation. So make sure to speak up. Keep dropping those questions in that Q&A section throughout the event today. Now, that Q&A panel also has another function, and that's the place to let us know if something goes wrong with your event. If you can't see something or hear something, this can be obviously upsetting. So when that happens, the first thing you want to do is a quick browser refresh or two. Sometimes it takes a couple to reset your screen. Usually that'll fix it. If it doesn't, let us know in that Q&A, and we will hop right on it and help you out. Second, check out our handouts section, which is right there next to the Q&A tab. I'd especially like to call your attention to a link for finding out more about Rubrik's cyber resilience solutions. Over there, you're also going to find a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of more upcoming events just like this one as they unfold in 2025. And finally, at the end of the webinar, we are going to be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one of you listening right now. Now, you do have to be in attendance during the entire live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of the prize drawing can be found in the handouts section. It's really boring, but if you want to go there, it's at the bottom. Just scroll down and you'll find the link with all of the details. And finally, one of the best benefits of being on one of our events is the opportunity to ask questions, like I have said repeatedly, and we are going to sweeten the inducement for you. There you go. That's the right word. We're going to sweeten that inducement by giving away another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question that we get. So when they come in, we're going to round up all those questions at the end, just like a rodeo. We're going to pick out the best question, and that person will also get a $50 Amazon gift card. So there are a couple of ways to win today. So keep those questions coming. All right. And with that, folks, I am ready to get to the main event. I hope you are too. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today, Mike Preston, Staff Technical Marketing Manager for Rubrik. Mike has got some awesome stuff to share with us today. I cannot wait to get going. He is in the house and ready to go. So, Mike, the floor is yours, sir. Take it away.
All right, first up, thanks everybody for showing up today. I hope you find the next 45 minutes or so useful. My name's Mike Preston, and I work in technical marketing here at Rubrik. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about how Rubrik and AWS can really help you become cyber resilient in the face of cyber threats. Now, we're going to cover off the entire attack timeline. This is pre-attack, during attack, and post-attack. Now, Rubrik and AWS have been working together for quite some time now. In fact, our very first release back in 2015 basically backed up VMware VMs and then archived those off to AWS. Now you'll see in the demos that we definitely do a whole lot more than that now. However, the point here is we've been better together for over 10 years, providing customers with a way to ensure that their cloud data and services are resilient to ransomware events. And our joint customers, both Rubrik and AWS customers, do get the best of both worlds as it pertains to cloud computing and data security. Now, if we kind of look at the agenda here, I'm going to start off with a handful of slides to really help lay out exactly what I mean, exactly what Rubrik means when we say things like complete cyber resilience. We'll talk about the technologies behind this and how Rubrik can help. But the majority of today's session's really going to be demos, right? We're going to dive into the lab and walk through a complete end-to-end demo of Rubrik and AWS. We'll showcase, how we can help during the entire attack timeline. Whether that's be minimizing the impact of an attack before it occurs, so during that pre-attack or peacetime era, viewing our data threat alerts when an attack is actually happening, and of course, showing how we can help you efficiently recover from an attack when it does occur. After that, we'll jump into some Q&A and we'll simply wrap up. So with that said, let's just dive in. So a bit about why we're here. Why does Rubrik exist? And the fact of the matter is, here on the left, we can see, worldwide security spend is up, right? We're spending more money on security today than we ever have. Look at it, $210+ billion, right? But even with all this infrastructure security spend, we're still seeing ransom payments and ransomware attacks also up. Here we can see on the right-hand side, $620+ million of just ransom payments, right? This doesn't even include the residual effects. So the idea is, our infrastructure security spend is up, but ransomware is still up. So the bad actors are still getting in, right? They might be sending an email, phishing, grabbing some credentials, and simply logging into your environment. So the need to have a platform like Rubrik Security Cloud, which can provide you security at the point of the actual data, basically minimize the impact those attacks are going to have and help you recover from those attacks, is really key into organizations surviving these ransomware attacks today. If we kind of look at the timeline, and this is an actual attack that we've pulled out, I think like Palo Alto's Unit 42 or something like that, we can really break down how the attacks work in terms of peacetime, which is going to be pre-attack, and wartime, which is essentially post-attack. So in this, we've seen initial access gained by someone grabbing some publicly exposed credentials that were sitting in an S3 bucket, basically an environment file that had their secret access keys in there. The bad actors go ahead and start listing API calls, right? They start listing all the buckets. They start discovering everything that you have within your environment. And that could be, it could be a week, could be months. They can sit in your environment for quite some time. Then once they start to find credentials, they start escalating that stuff, finally exfiltrate the data, delete the data, and drop sort of that ransomware note like, hey, if you want your data back, you need to pay us X amount of Bitcoin or something like that. So that's really peacetime, right? This is finally, when we get the impact, we understand that something's occurred, and then we go ahead and we assess that attack, engage our IR teams, as well as test and plan and begin our recovery. So all of this really takes time, right? Time before we can actually restore business operations. So what Rubrik is aiming to do is essentially shrink this timeline down, shrink the scope of the attack down to a point that's manageable for you to get your business back up and running. We need to assume attacks are going to happen, but we need to be able to recover from them faster and minimize the impact of them when they do occur. So let's kind of break out peacetime and wartime and take a look at some of the questions that we need answered. We'll look at before Rubrik and after Rubrik. So when we look about pre-attack and sort of active intrusion, what are some things that, like questions that if we can get the answers to, what can help us minimize that impact? And number one is going to be, where's all my critical data? Is it stale? Is it sensitive? Is it publicly accessible? Has it been accessed within the last 2 years? Who has access to that? What are my users looking like? Things like that. All of that all of these questions, if we can answer them, we can take proactive steps to ensure that the impact of the attack is as minimal as possible. And then when the attack actually occurs, can I detect data exfiltration attempts? Am I able to see what my users are doing? Is a user accessing sensitive data that they shouldn't have access to? Can I get alerts on things like that, right? Having all of that information is key to really doing as much as we can pre-attack. When Rubrik comes in, we start to glean some insights from your environment for all of this, understanding where all your data is, proactively taking steps to reduce data exposure, bringing least privilege access into your environment, ensuring your data is actually protected. Are we backing that data up so it's going to be there when we need to restore it, and as well as detecting data breaches as they are occurring. So Rubrik can help you answer all of those previous questions by delivering these services to you. And we'll walk through them all in the demo, and hopefully you'll like what you see. But now we move on to post-attack, right? When we do get attacked, and the key there is when. We're not saying if you get attacked anymore. We need to run on the assumption that the attack's going to happen. Do we know what data has been compromised? Are we able to understand the blast radius of the attack? Has it spread? Is it just in my cloud environment? Is it in cloud and on-prem? Is there any SaaS exposure? Basically, where has this ransomware, where has this malware spread to? Has it affected any sensitive data? Has any data been exfiltrated? At what point did the bad actor get into my environment and start planting files? Because I need to know that in order to restore to a clean snapshot, right? And can I isolate the malware or the ransomware within those backups so that when I go to restore, I'm not just going to reinfect my environment? So the idea is, can we restore clean data? Is my data there? Were my backups immutable? Because, bad actors are also targeting the backup data as well because they want to increase their chances of getting the ransom. When we bring Rubrik into the mix, we could really start to use our data threat analytics, our data security posture, and of course our backup and data protection capabilities to do things like understand the scope of the attack, what workloads have been affected, determine the point of infection. Where is that malware? Find that malware and actually quarantine that malware so it cannot be used in restore, right? Restore the good stuff, leave the bad stuff, tucked away. And of course, to the point where we're actually getting our business, safely up and running, whether that be back to our original cloud accounts or to new cloud accounts, right? We give you the options in terms of recovering from a ransomware attack to wherever you need to recover. So it's really, these two things, Rubrik's data security posture management, which is really going to help you identifying your sensitive data and give you all those, proactive steps that you can take to minimize the impact of that attack. When we take that and we sort of combine that with our cyber recovery capabilities, being able to determine the blast radius, quickly find out what workloads, what files, folders have been affected, and then give you the options to restore those efficiently to any environment, is really where we get to complete cyber resilience. So with that, I'm going to jump into the lab and we're just going to get started with some demos because I know seeing is believing. So let's just jump into the lab and have a look at both data security posture management for pre-attack and our cyber recovery for post-attack. All right, so we'll start off here on the Rubrik DSPM dashboard where we get a nice bird's eye view of all of our data across all of our different cloud and SaaS accounts. And this really allows us to somewhat assess our data security posture by pointing out, where our data is and whether or not it's sensitive in nature. We can see things like our top assets that are at risk here, any policy violations that might have occurred over time. And we can also see here that we've gone further than just pointing out that data is sensitive in nature, but we're actually classifying it according to its context, i.e. like, an asset contains personal data or this asset contains financial data and so on and so forth. So Rubrik DSPM really assesses our overall risk and then applies that to two different environmental entities. So we have our assets, basically our workloads. So whether that be an S3 bucket, an EC2 instance, a managed database, things like that. as well as applying risk to our identities. So think our IAM users, our IAM roles, groups, and basically different identities as well. So let's jump into our assets first. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drive into our asset inventory here. And as we onboard accounts into Rubrik DSPM, Rubrik automatically goes out and discovers and classifies all those workloads running within those accounts. And then this asset inventory gives us sort of that ongoing visibility into all of the data that's living on those workloads. So that lets us know, where our most sensitive and most at-risk workloads reside. So we can see a number of different types of workloads listed here. We have S3 buckets, Snowflake, blob storage, SQL managed instances. There's different things like RDS databases, SharePoint, OneDrive. Basically, all of our different cloud and SaaS data gets automatically inventoried here. And we can also see the different types of data that's on these workloads. So here we can see this S3 bucket has personal data, financial data, and business data. So that's kind of, the types of data. And then what makes up sort of those overarching categories is things like, for personals, birth date, client name, email, stuff like that. Financials obviously going to be, banking information, credit card. And then business gets into sort of like, some contractual information as well. Aside from just pointing out sort of the data types, we also get the context of that data. So in this case, it's we got some media files, we got some customer data. We could see there's a SQL dump on here, human resource data. So we get a little bit more about the context of that data as well. So drilling into this S3 bucket, we get a bit more information. So we can see where it's located, in terms of the accounts and the regions and different things like that. We can also see when it was last accessed. So in this case, this one's, might contain some stale data. It hasn't been accessed in a couple of years. So then we also see some information down here in the security posture section where, whether or not it's, publicly exposed, whether we have encryption, whether we're auditing this, as well as whether or not we're taking backups. So are we protecting this actual workload? So all of this information here, we can really use to proactively take steps to secure this data ahead of time before an attack actually takes place. We also have this risk assessment here, and this is generated from a number of pre-built or pre-canned policies that DSPM has built into the product. And whether or not this workload is adhering to those policies, we'll get more into this in a few minutes because this is a big part of Rubrik DSPM. But for now, we're going to focus in sort of on the sensitive data. Again, we can see all those different data types that we saw on the main listing. So things like personal, financial, and business data. So let's say I hover over financial here and let's just go over to our credit card data and we'll click on that. So what this does is bring us into the data explorer view. So here we can actually drive through, the file system or the file listing if it's an S3 bucket and then start to navigate the actual file structure of the data that's in there, seeing, exactly where these different types of data live. So we can see here we have a SQL backup, and we can see there's a bunch of different information in here in terms of sensitive data. So things like credit card data, all of that different stuff. And since Rubrik understands sort of the metadata around SQL backups and SQL dumps and different things like that, we can actually drive into the metadata and view sort of the tables and the rows and find out exactly where that information is. So we can see here's our credit card information in our customer data table. So we have some records there. And if we click here, we can actually sample this data. And what this does is this actually creates a tunnel between sort of the data and your browser session. So we're not transferring any data to Rubrik at this point. It actually stays within your environment, so it never leaves a customer account. This simply executes the Lambda scripts that power the solution, pull this data live, and obviously mask it because it is sensitive in nature and sends it directly through the browser environment. So the actual data itself, remains completely under control or your control. We just get sort of this random sampling of all the data. So that's kind of our asset inventory. That lets us sort of browse and view, risk through our assets or our workloads. But as I mentioned, we can't always be interested in assets, right? Quite often, bad actors are getting into our environments through compromised accounts. So whether that be Active Directory, Entra ID, IAM within AWS. So what DSPM also does is assess and classify risks based on our identities. So we'll get a similar type of view as to our asset inventory here if I jump into the identity inventory, except we're now focused more on users and groups and roles. So since DSPM sort of has that inventory and classification of where all our sensitive data lives, and then we also have that inventory of all of our users, we can start to analyze ACLs and permissions and different policies and things like that to show exactly who has access to what in terms of sensitive data. So if I jump over to users here, here's an IAM user, Natalie Henderson. And we can see she has access to about 3 million total records of sensitive data. So quite a bit. We can also see that she's our CISO. So this access is probably purposeful in this case or intentional. But could you imagine if she was maybe a junior level help desk employee or an assistant office administrator or a part-time person or something like that? And we see that they have access to all of this data. So we can really start to glean some insights as to whose account might be compromised and whose account is really at risk if it is compromised, right? We're still working within sort of our peacetime or our pre-attack timeline here. So we can take sort of those proactive steps to remove this access ahead of time. That way, in the event that the account does get compromised, the data itself should be shielded away as we've gone ahead and taken the steps to remove permissions. So again, if I click on Natalie here, we'll get further information, right? We can see a little bit of information around her job title, her name, the number of groups and roles that she's assigned to. Again, we can see sort of the blast radius. If Natalie's account was to be compromised, they're going to gain access to all of this different data, whether it's restrictive, sensitive, internal data, non-sensitive. We could see the types of data again. So they're going to gain access to some financial data, where that data lives in terms of what account. So, maybe she shouldn't even have access to anything within the dev account, only the production account. So we can really quickly get some information here that we can use to secure up Natalie's account. Down here, we get the access graph, which again allows us to map out the data a little more. Maybe we jump into, take a look at everything within the production account she has access to, or if we're wondering how she gets access to credit cards, we could select it here and sort of map it back from it's coming from the Acme demo production accounts. So we're able to sort of get a bunch of different views and things like that we can sort of see how she's getting that access. If the access is assigned through a group or a role, again, we can jump in here and see what role she's assigned to. So again, she's assigned to this data scientist read-only upload role, which has some read-write permissions to these types of data. We can see what groups that she's in. So she's a member of a number of different groups. Maybe she's not supposed to be, within this human resources group, and that's how she's gaining access to HR data. We can take those proactive steps to remove her from that. And again, if you want to drill into the actual group, we can click the human resources group here and see sort of the same type of information. What access does the members of this group have? What accounts? Here's our access graph again, and we can see again roles assigned to the group, and of course users that are members of that group. So basically here, our asset and our identity inventory is really here to help us to get a better understanding of where our data is, who has access to it, why they have access to it, or how they gained access to it, and really point us into the direction of minimizing any impact an attack may have by taking those proactive steps to ensure that our environment is as secure as it can be before the attack takes place. Now, often we're not all that familiar with who should have access to what. So sometimes when we're looking at this data, we might be looking at it and say, well, I don't know if that person's supposed to have access to this, or I don't know if sensitive data should be living on this account. So to help us with this, this is really where we get into those DSPM policies. So DSPM provides us with a number of pre-built configurable policies, and then reports on any violations of this policy. So I'm going to head into our data security violations tab here to give us a little bit of a better idea of how this all works. So hopefully we could start to see how it's coming all together. So here we could see policies are really broken down into 4 main categories, right? We have things like overexposed data. So this will be things like publicly accessible sensitive data, data with third-party access, data allowing external access, unauthorized permissions to restricted data. Again, I'll get into all of the policies that DSPM monitors for, but for now we can see we have about 37 or 62 critical violations. 40 of them are actually critical and active at the moment for overexposed data. Next, we have unprotected data. So this is just not, data that's not backed up or data that's not part of, a Rubrik SLA domain. But this also scans for things like, whether or not encryption exists at rest for our data. Does encryption exist in flight? Are we actively logging access to this data? Is there plain text credentials in that data? This is all about being unprotected data or data that's out there that's not protected. And all of this is sort of key ways that attackers move laterally throughout our environment during their discovery phase. So this is definitely a good one to tidy up for sure. So next we have misplaced data. Misplaced data within Rubrik DSPM basically is we allow you the ability to designate or configure where your sensitive data should live. For example, sensitive data should only be in this portion of the production environment and should never exist within our dev test accounts. Or GDPR data must live only within the EU and should not exist anywhere outside of that. So misplaced data reports on any data in our environment that is essentially not placed or not located where it belongs. You always hear of things like dev test accounts being compromised and attackers getting access to sensitive data, which probably shouldn't be there in the first place. So this is where we'll report on that and allow you to take those proactive steps to ensure that it doesn't happen, right? Ensure that that sensitive data is out of there before the attack takes place. And then finally, we get into redundant data. So this is essentially sort of the raw data. It's really a great category that not only helps us to minimize our attack surface, but also lower our overall cloud costs, as it points out like things like, do I have unmanaged backups living within my environment? If so, and if they aren't needed, maybe I should just get rid of them or archive them somewhere, right? And move them to lower cost storage. It just poses an additional risk if I'm attacked. It's more data the attackers can gain access to. Also, it takes a look at all of our sensitive assets, and if they haven't been accessed, say, in 90 days, they'll be flagged as redundant. And if no one's using it, there's really no need for it to be there. So you might as well remove it or archive it again to lower cost storage. And this, not only decreases that overall attack surface, but it increases our overall data security posture. And, in most scenarios, saves us a little money on our monthly cloud bill. So let's take an example now of, let's take a look at an example of a violation of one of these. So here we can see our publicly exposed sensitive data. We have a critical severity here. There's a number of frameworks associated with it. We can see the amount of data that's at risk, 864,000 records, so quite a few. And we can see there's a number of assets that have that publicly exposed data within it. We can see a couple of S3 buckets here and somebody's OneDrive, right? So this is really pointing out really quickly, like, hey, the public can gain access to this sensitive data, right? Username, client name, client phone number, a number of other things, like some data that we don't want to be sharing. We can again drive into this S3 bucket to get more information about it. First up, if we wanted to create a ticket right from in here, we have, pre-built integrations with things like ServiceNow and Jira, so you can create a ticket directly from within Rubrik DSPM. We get a little more information on the violation, sort of when it was first detected. A little bit more information on the asset itself, again, where it lives in terms of regions and accounts, who owns it, when it was last accessed, any tags that are on this. If we jump into violation details, again, we can see all the different data types that are being publicly exposed here. So a lot of financial information. Again, we can browse that file structure. We see the actual path of the files that are in violation. So again, it's that SQL dump. And we also get a little bit of information around remediation. Right. So in this case, if we wanted to ensure that this isn't publicly available, here's a policy we can apply to our bucket. We can simply, copy this, modify it, put our VPC in, things like that, and just apply this policy to our bucket, and away we go. We've denied public access to the folder, or you can disable public access using the AWS CLI. So you can go ahead and disable public access on the entire bucket if you wanted to. So we not only get information around the violation itself, but we get some step-by-step instructions to, essentially remediate this violation and clean up our environment, right? Again, proactive steps that we can take pre-attack. That's the first part of being cyber resilient, is being able to minimize the impact of an attack, assume it's going to happen, do as much as you can before that day to ensure that things are going to go well and recovery is going to be efficient and swift when an attack does take place. So aside from just the publicly exposed sensitive data, we search for a number of different violations based on a number of different policies. So if we jump into them here, we can show some quickly. So again, here's our categories of overexposed data. Again, publicly exposed, cross-account role access, user access that's not allowed to sensitive data. So we can configure all this to say this person shouldn't have access or these groups shouldn't have access. Report on all that. Public environmental files. For unprotected data, we see things like masking, encryption, again, backup, plain text credentials, misplaced data. Like I mentioned, this is really around a lot of different regulations. So GDPR, some misplacement of consumer data that's outside of the EU, different, financial types of information maybe need to be in more secure environments versus less secure. Redundant data. This is where we're going to save, a little bit of money by, removing unmanaged backups, removing, duplicate copies of sensitive data, and things like that. If we wanted, we can create our own policies as well. So, there's here's one for misplaced data. You can select an environment and say, this environment shouldn't have sensitive data at all. So things like that. Dev test environment. We can set that up so if it detects sensitive data within that dev test environment, it's going to flag a violation and bubble that up to us within those data security violation lists. So essentially, you can customize it to your organization. So hopefully this really helps you understand how Rubrik DSPM can really help you to minimize the impact of an attack before it takes place. Right? There's so much we can do during that peacetime or, before an attack happens to make our life so much easier when that attack does occur. Now, that said, cyber resilience is really about what we could do before, during, and after an attack. So if we move on to show how Rubrik can help during an attack, it really boils down to our data threat alerts within DSPM. So here we're really monitoring our identities and what they're actually trying to do within the cloud environment. So as I mentioned, most attackers are simply fishing for credentials now and just logging into our environments, performing for discovery, for sometimes months in order to really escalate their privileges and exfiltrate as much data as they can. So here we can see a number of alerts have been raised around our Tony Stark user. So if we start to look at what's been going on here, we can see, Tony's performed some excessive file enumeration, downloaded sensitive data, downloaded data to his desktop, and then really started to excessively download a bunch of files. So in this case, within sort of near real time here, we can see what Tony's doing and probably come to the conclusion that, Tony's account here may be compromised, right? This is out of the norm for what Tony might do. So this really helps us point to how an attack actually is taking place or how an attacker has got in. And again, we can drill in and get some more information around this alert itself. Things like how many files he downloaded, what assets were impacted, different IP addresses, as in terms of the actual files and full path to the files that he downloaded, as well as all the different events that are generating these alerts or backing these alerts. We can get all of this information really, really fast, which is crucial, especially when an attack is taking place. So we've really covered off here how to minimize the impact of an attack should it take place, how to see the different data threat alerts within our environment during an attack. The final piece to becoming truly cyber resilient revolves around recovery, right? In the event that an attack has happened, organizations need to be able to recover and recover successfully and recover quickly in order to bounce back really fast and avoid having to pay that ransom. So if we've done our job, cleaned up our environment, minimized the impact of that attack, when an attack happens, we're just going to simply recover from that. And hopefully we don't have to recover too much. So for this, we're going to jump in to Rubrik Security Cloud and have a look. So first off, on our main dashboard here, we can see at a glance some compliance statistics around all of our data, whether it's located, on premises, in the cloud, or delivered through various SaaS applications like Microsoft 365. Now, if we hover over cloud, we can see the workloads that we've automatically discovered, along with whether or not they're protected by Rubrik. So another great example of minimizing the impact of an attack is definitely ensuring that all your data is being backed up and protected by Rubrik so we can actually recover after the attack takes place. Now, to protect data, Rubrik bundles up all of your traditional data protection constructs, things like RPO and retention, as well as archival and replication settings into what we call an SLA domain. Now, SLA domains are basically policies that we can create and simply apply to our data on various different hierarchies to ensure that it's protected. So let's walk through creating one here. So if I select create an SLA domain, first thing I notice is I can select, everything that I want to protect, including, on-prem VM type information. If I scroll down to cloud, let's say we're going to create something for EC2. So we could create one to protect all of this stuff, or we can, select one item and just have one item per SLA and create multiple SLAs. The options are really up to your organization as to how you want to configure all of this. So the first thing that we're going to take a look at here is creating our frequency and retention, so our RPO. So how often we want to back up. Let's say we want to take a backup every 8 hours. We're going to keep that for a day. We're going to take a day, keep that for maybe 30 days, and then we're going to go ahead and take a monthly, and let's keep that for a couple of years or something like that. So essentially you fill in your frequency retention, and then we get to archival and replication. So I'm going to go ahead and select both of these to configure, and we'll explain them as we go through. So what archival does is essentially processes backups at the end of the chain and allows you to migrate some of those older backups that you may be keeping around for compliance purposes to a different storage location, preferably one that's, probably lower cost. So for instance, we could say, let's keep everything local for 10 days here. Anything after that 10 days, I'm probably not going to restore. Let's go ahead and archive that to, in this case, we're going to archive that to Glacier. right? So we're going to store local snapshots for 10 days. We can restore those very quick. Everything else that's older than that, I'm just keeping around to satisfy, a checkbox on an audit report. We're going to move that to Glacier Deep Archive or somewhere where, we don't have to worry about it because we're probably never going to restore it. Now, replication, on the other hand, is very similar to archival, but instead of processing backups at the end of the chain, we're going to process our most recent backups at the beginning of the chain. So in this case, let's say we want to take our most five days of our most recent backups, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to archive them or replicate those to an entirely different AWS account. So in this case, I'm going to take the 5 most recent backups, put them in this TME lab account, and maybe I'm going to put them in US East, right? So we can replicate our backups cross account to protect against any account compromise, as well as cross region to protect against any sort of regional level outage. So we'll go ahead and click next here. We then get the option for retention lock. Retention lock provides us with the ability to essentially lock this SLA domain so that it can't be changed or it can't be modified in any way that's going to result in our retention going down. So say somebody does gain access to Rubrik, they come in here, they can't change this SLA and say expire backups after 0 days, so they automatically get deleted and things like that, right? So if we lock this, what that means is if somebody wants to change the retention of the SLA domain to something smaller than it currently is, they will have to call Rubrik support, and then we have something called quorum authorization where 2 members or 2 designated members from that customer will need to talk to customer support in order to essentially unlock the retention lock setting. So we did just kind of give our SLA a name. I'm going to call this just AWS, a description, things like that, get a brief sort of description as to what's going to be created, and we can go ahead and click create. And everything's good. So the first thing we need to do after we create that SLA domain is actually assign it to some of our workloads. So we can do that in a number of different ways. So we see all of our EC2 instances that we have within our account here. Again, as these are onboarded to Rubrik, Rubrik automatically discovers these things, inventories them, and shows us them in this view here. So we can actually, select an instance, click manage protection, and assign our SLA domain directly to it if we wanted to. So it's as simple as that. It might take a while to go through and individually assign SLAs. So for that, you can assign actually an SLA directly on the account. So I can select this account here, click manage protection, and assign our SLA directly on that account. And what this does is it means that all the existing workloads within that account will automatically be protected, plus any new workloads that get created will automatically inherit this SLA and be protected. So data protection in this case is no longer an afterthought. So you can assign maybe an SLA that takes maybe, a weekly backup to the entire account, and then sort of override that assignment on the instance level to take more frequent backups for, our more important or more critical workloads. The final way to assign SLAs is we can use something called tag rules. So in this case, I can see I have a tag rule set up that looks for a tag with the key value of environment prod. If it detects this AWS tag within the AWS account, we automatically assign this bronze SLA domain. So this is a cool way, and we see a lot of customers leveraging these features to integrate data protection directly into their deployment pipelines, right? So they just simply tag an EC2 instance or tag an S3 bucket as it's being created during the deployment pipeline, and Rubrik kicks in and automatically protects that if it detects that tag. So many different ways to assign SLA domains to our workloads, a lot of different options. You can really tailor this and set it up custom to your organization. Now, in order to restore, and we'll start with sort of your day-to-day level restore. We're not going to think about cyber recovery right now. Let's just think about, someone calls you up, says, hey, I need to restore this file to this to this EC2 instance, or hey, I'd like you to restore this EC2 instance in whole. on an image level. Let's kind of walk through how that works. So if I dive into this EC2 instance right here, we get a nice sort of overview of what's going on with this instance. So we can see the SLA domain that's assigned to it, whether or not we're indexing files. We see a little bit about our data security posture, and I'll get more into this in a little bit. But we can also see things like the object details, what region it's in, the instance type, all the different tags that have been assigned to this, where it lives in terms of VPCs and whatnot. The calendar view here shows us all the different days that we have backups for this workload. Let's just say we need to restore an individual file. We can totally search right in here. This is going to search across all those backups that we have, and you can easily come in here, click recover on this file, and restore that to where you want to place it. In terms of image level, we can dive in here, find the snapshot or the point in time that we want to recover to. We'll select recover. Again, we have the option to recover files from this specific point in time if we want to. We can also restore. What restore means is we're going to restore at an image level this EC2 instance directly back to our production environment. It's going to overwrite our production workload. If we don't want to touch our production workload, we can use something called export, which is essentially going to create a new EC2 instance using the backup data from our production instance. So when we do an export, we do get a little more control over what that restore is going to look like. So we can change the name, we can change the instance type. Maybe we want to migrate this to a large instance. We can restore again cross account, cross regions. We can change KMS keys, select where we want to put it in terms of our networking and our VPCs, as well as change key pairs and all that sort of stuff. So a little more options when we're looking at recovery. So this is really great for our sort of day-to-day recovery, right? Our day-to-day management. But however, when we look at recovering from an actual ransomware event, things change quite a bit, right? Gone are the days where we can simply just restore to last night's backup or restore a certain workload, as there's many questions that we need to answer before a recovery can take place after a cyber attack. So when we think of that, we think of things like, what data was affected, right? Was it more than one workload? Was it 10? Was it 100? How is it spread? What are the individual files and folders within those workloads that were affected? Was the data sensitive? Basically, we need to understand the actual blast radius of the attack. And then once we understand that, we need to be able to hunt through our backups to ensure that the ransomware or malware doesn't simply just reside on the backups itself, right? We need to make sure that we quarantine that off so we don't restore this and get into this sort of endless loop of restoring and then finally realizing we're reinfected and so on and so forth, right? We want to restore the good stuff, keep out the bad stuff. So to help with this, Rubrik provides some data threat analytics that we can use to glean information from our backups to point out things like anomalies within our environment, as well as detect malware within our backups and quarantine that. So let's take a look at our data threat analytics. So here's the main dashboard for data threat analytics, and we can see somewhat of a threat summary of our environment. We're seeing we have 4 anomalies that have been detected here. So these anomalies are actually generated or identified by sending metadata through a 2-stage machine learning model, which first looks at things like file changes. So do we have a whole bunch of newly created files, deleted files, modified files, things like that. And then it goes through a second stage, which searches for signs of encryption by ransomware. And at the end of the day, if we drill into our anomalies here, we can actually see that it starts to point out a number of different anomalies within it. So here's that same EC2 instance here. We can see we have a number of files that have been marked suspicious, deleted, and added. We can see that it's actually detected that this is Lockbit ransomware. So it's a pretty powerful feature to really understand what's abnormal with in your environment. If I drive into this, again, we get a little bit more information, sort of a timeline of when these anomalies occurred. Again, the specific count of suspicious files, the actual anomaly that it's classified this at, whether or not encryption exists within this, and then we can actually see the suspicious files right here that it's found. And in the case it finds a ransomware note, it'll actually point this out in here as well. We could quickly download these if we wanted for forensics. So this will just, send a request to download these files if we want to, send them across to our security teams to further triage or different things like that. We see a bit of an event timeline as to when everything has occurred. So basically, without doing anything, we've essentially found the blast radius, right? We saw those 4 workloads that were affected. With this specific workload, we can drill in here into browse and actually browse the actual file system of this EC2 instance. And it looks like, the majority of everything here has been in C shares, right? And we can even dive in here and get to the actual files and folders that have been affected. We can select a folder, recover directly from here if we wanted to. We can recover the entire snapshot here if we wanted to. We can resolve this anomaly or accept this anomaly if we wanted to. So there's lots of different options here. But like I mentioned, there's really 2 parts to data threat analytics. One is the anomaly detection, determining that blast radius, which we've done in essentially, a couple of minutes here. The second piece, though, is really ensuring that we're not going to simply restore the malware or restore the ransomware back into our production environment and just reinfect our environment. So to combat this, Rubrik has what we call threat hunting and threat monitoring. So if I go into threats here, I'm just going to change this to the past 7 days so we get some matches. What threat monitoring is we take a curated feed from Rubrik of known file hashes, known sort of 0-day exploits, known ransomware strains, and we scan those backups as they occur. So as data, is processed through the Rubrik platform, it also gets scanned looking for matches on those files, right? And we can see in the case of our EC2 instance here, we do have some matches. So if I dive in here, we can see it's found iCar on a number of different snapshots within our environment. So it gives us some more information around the hash that it's searching for, the intel source. This came from our curated list and different things like that. So, as data is coming in, we automatically scan this and find this and give you the ability to actually quarantine this data directly from here. Now, this is great, if it matches something within our curated feed, but, you may want to customize this to your liking. If it's something you want to do automatically, you can come in here, create your own Intel feed if you want to by simply adding IOCs. So whether that's a YARA rule or a file hash. So if you have something you're specifically looking for in your environment, you can add it to threat monitoring and it will automatically scan backups. If it's a one-off thing, that's where threat hunting comes into place. And threat hunting is essentially the same thing as threat monitoring. However, we're doing it on demand. So if you just want to put a certain YARA rule in or a certain file hash to quarantine some data out of your backups so they can't be used for recovery, then you can do that with threat hunting. So now that we've kind of quarantined the bad data, we've determined the known good data that we can actually use, or our last non-anomalous, non-quarantined snapshot, we can begin our actual recovery. So if I jump back into our anomalies here, jump back into our EC2 instance, I'm just going to go ahead and say, you know what, I want to recover the full snapshot in this case. The first thing we need to do is Rubrik automatically selects sort of that last healthy snapshot for us. So the last snapshot that doesn't contain the malware, doesn't contain anomalies, basically our last known good clean point in time is automatically selected for us because Rubrik's gone ahead and automatically scanned everything and gleaned all those data threats out of our backup data. So again, the recovery process is going to be fairly simple to the day-to-day stuff. At this point, we can restore directly back to our EC2 instance, or we can create another one and again have the ability to change all of that information. So hopefully these demos have really helped to hammer home how Rubrik defines, cyber resilience, right? Simply recovering is not enough. we need to be able to glean those insights from the data in order to recover to a clean point in time. We need to be able to hunt through those backups, in order to remove or quarantine or contain that malware within the backup so it can't be used for recovery, so we're not getting into this endless loop of reinfecting our environments. But recovering from ransomware is not enough, right? Rubrik also provides tools to minimize the impact of the attack before it takes place. So improving your overall data security posture with Rubrik's DSPM, right? Being able to identify where your sensitive data is, who has access to it, what level of access do they have, should they have that access, and cleaning all of that up before an attack takes place. So only when you prepare for an attack beforehand, plus have the ability to recover from the attack when it does happen, are you really truly cyber resilient. I'm going to go ahead and pass this back, and I think we have some time to address some of the awesome questions that I see on the chat here.
Wow, what a fantastic presentation today, Mike. I love the in-depth tutorials and the great overview on what it takes to stay safe and secure in today's somewhat untrustworthy, you might say, environment. So I've thrown a poll question up here, and I would love everyone to respond. You saw a bunch of demos today. And we want to know which ones you believe would benefit your organization most. There was the pre-attack demo that Mike showed. How can you be proactive in defending against cyber attacks utilizing data security, posture management during an attack? What happens while it's all going on? How can real-time threat detection save your data? And post-attack. So you've been hit. What happens next? How do you get going again? How long are you going to be down? All of that stuff are the things that Mike showed us today, and we would love to hear what you think about that. Now, unfortunately, Mike had so much good information that he did not leave time for the Q&A as he thought, but have no fear. If the Rubrik team didn't get to a question during the event, they are going to be following up with you, so you will be hearing from them. So keep voting for another few seconds in this poll, and then I am going to go to the second and last poll of the event. So here we go. We are going to go forward. All right. So let us know now. Would you like to schedule a meeting to discuss one or more of these demos in depth? Please let us know. Let Rubrik know how they can help you. Reach out to them so they can reach out to you. And while you vote in this final poll of the day, I am going to give away our Amazon gift card. As I mentioned at the beginning, you do have to be present during the entire event to be eligible for the prize. This is a $250 card that we are giving away today. So while you finish up your voting here to tell Rubrik about a meeting request and to see these demos in action, we are picking a winner, and that winner of the $250 prize is Jess Kalinowski from California. So congratulations to you, Jess. You are the first winner on my first event of the year. We're going to be in touch to get you your card, so sit tight. And with that, folks, we are just about wrapped here for today. On behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Rubrik for making this event possible. I want to thank all of you attendees for being here with us, for making 2025 or kicking 2025 off to a great start. Can't wait to do a whole bunch more events with you this year, folks. It's really been a pleasure. That concludes this event for right now. However, have a great rest of your day, everyone.